We will start. Perfect. Just about to say, we're going to start recording this meeting very shortly. So today is day one of a 3-day workshop focusing on the Delaware River Basin, and we're very excited to learn a little bit about your basin and talk with you about kind of some best practices about climate resilience. So today we're going to be focusing on water, climate change, and all of the uncertainties. So we have a very, like I mentioned, we have a very packed agenda. I'm going to go ahead and do some quick logistics, and then we will jump into our first presentation here today. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoom since our 2020 change in work status. But for those of you who haven't been on Zoom as frequently, these are the control panels that are important today. There's a mute and unmute button right on the bottom left corner of your screen. You can turn on and off your video as well right next to that unmute button. There's a chat function. We'll be sending resources and asking you questions, sending out Miro boards, Mentimeter questions, things like that via the chat. So keep an eye out for that. And then there's also a raise hand function if you have questions, or you can also go ahead and put those in the chat as well. And if you do need to leave the meeting this morning or afternoon, there is that leave meeting button right on the bottom right hand side of your screen. So there's several pieces of technology that we'll be using these 3 days, to talk to you more collaboratively. We really want to make this a collaborative space for the folks that will be here. The first is Mentimeter. This is going to be either a browser-based or a text-based polling survey question style technology. So we will provide specific instructions as we get there. We'll use that today. And then also we'll be using Miro board, which is a virtual whiteboard to work collaboratively in groups. So we will be doing that as well today, and I'll give you a little bit more information about how to use that shortly once we get into those breakout rooms where we'll be using that. So just a little bit of a preview. For workshop logistics, please mute yourself during presentations, except if you're called upon to ask a question. We understand things happen, but I'll prompt you to mute yourself if you're accidentally off of mute. For video, please keep your video off during presentations. And during the breakout rooms, we really do encourage you to turn on your videos. This is supposed to be a workshop. It is in a virtual space, but we would like that, collaborative group feeling if we can during those small breakout sessions, which we'll do today and tomorrow. So in terms of recording, all presentations will be recorded. Breakout group discussions will not be recorded, but we're hoping to gather some of the information from those recordings in that Miro board that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And then also please rename yourself by what you'd like to be called. If you feel comfortable sharing your pronouns, please do. Just want to be sure that this space is respectful for all folks that are joining us today. So again, this workshop is meant to be collaborative, so please be respectful of others and their thoughts and ideas, and we're really excited to make this an interesting discussion. So thanks again for being here. And now I will turn it over to Alan Cohn and Julia Rockwell from the New York City Department of Environmental Protection and the Philadelphia Water Department. So Alan and Julia.
Great, thanks so much, Alyssa. And you can take us to the next slide, please. I am, as Alyssa said, with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. We are the current vice chair of the Water Utility Climate Alliance. For those of you that are not familiar with WUCA, you can see our membership here along with our mission and vision. We serve over 50 million Americans. We've been a leader in climate change adaptation for the water sector, and working to develop tools, resources, and data and approaches for usable, actionable climate science. That's something we'll be focusing on quite a bit over the next few days. Even though WUCA has been around for over a decade now, this is always a work in progress, and really looking forward to taking this in a new direction today. We've worked with federal partners over the years, as well with water utilities in broader climate adaptation community. We're really excited to have this partnership with EPA. We've also worked with NOAA, and really interested in continuing the work that we've been doing. This is just one of many workshops we've held. WUCA has delivered 7 climate resilience trainings around the country over the last 7 years. This is part of this ongoing partnership that includes AGCI. Special shout out to Julie Vado, who's been amazing, in addition to support from Steve Freeze and others at EPA, and the Cadmus team, Melissa and others. We really appreciate it. You can go to the next slide, please. So WUCA, we encourage you to check out our website. It's wucaonline.org. I'm just typing in the chat. You can find many of the products we've released over the years. Business function mapping, I won't go through all of these, but everything from identifying the ways that utilities use climate information, profiling leading practices in climate adaptation, working with academic partners to advance modeling work, and providing guidance and case studies. We're really looking to cover all angles when it comes to both highlighting where advances are being made, as well as continuing to work with the climate science community to advance the information at the scales that we need it. And that's something that is also going to be discussed later today. Next slide, please. So WUCA recognizes that climate change is here and now. We are experiencing the impacts on our water systems, as I think all of us know. This image is quite a bit away from the East Coast. As everyone knows, the West has been dealing with severe drought issues. And this is something that we can't forget about here in the Northeast either. We have been experiencing, as most of you know, a lot of heavy rain events. That is something we need to prepare for. What does the future hold for extreme rainfall, for sea level rise? But what about drought as well? This is, a theme that we'll be considering over the next couple of days, is considering all the potential futures that we need to prepare for, and how do we develop plans that are really optimal in the face of the different types of extremes that we might experience. Next slide, please. So one thing we also wanted to acknowledge is that our work today, we believe aligns with the new Biden-Harris National Climate Resilience Framework, which outlines 6 core objectives for a roadmap to climate resilience, including embedding climate resilience into planning and management, and equipping communities with information and resources needed to assess their climate risks and develop the climate resilient solutions most appropriate for them. The quote on top, "an all hands on deck effort," is something I took from the intro of the report, which is referencing the multiple layers of government, community engagement. I'm just going to add a little bit on this, or elaborate on it from my perspective. But it really does require us working across different levels of government, and within different sectors. As we see today, we're working with multiple stakeholders, because we really can't do this in silos. Next slide, please. So I think with this one, I'm going to hand it off to Julia. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, Julia. But this
That's
is
fine.
just to show, this is might not reflect the latest numbers, but I think this was accurate as of a day or two ago. But just to highlight that last point about the multiple sectors that are being engaged today. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alan. So I'm Julia Rockwell. I work Philadelphia Water Department and manage our climate change adaptation program. And I just want to thank you all for joining today. To give you a bit of an idea of who is in the workshop today, we have 29 or so representatives from utilities in the Delaware River Basin. We have 13 representatives from climate science and boundary organizations, and 15 reps from basin and partner organizations. So a really good cross-section of different stakeholders that we were hoping to engage with over the next few days. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly touch on WUCA's broader vision for these workshops and trainings, which, as Alan mentioned, have happened across the country. We've had 7 trainings so far, and now we're having this training for the Delaware River Basin. So WUCA's broader vision is to foster smart translation and use of climate information, to encourage action on adaptation and resilience planning under conditions of deep uncertainty, which we will talk a lot about during this training, effectively communicate to decision makers, transfer knowledge from WUCA's community of practice, and to help WUCA achieve its strategic plan goals, which include to innovate and lead, mainstream and operationalize, and transfer knowledge. So we have some specific objectives for the workshop that we're holding for the Delaware River Basin. And Alyssa, you can actually go to the next slide because these objectives are reiterated in our agenda. So to give you guys a brief overview of our planned agenda for the next 3 days, today is obviously day 1, and we're really going to focus on climate change projections for the Northeast region and the Delaware River Basin specifically, and also create a shared understanding of the context in which climate change science and adaptation leading practices are being applied at water utilities. And then on day 2, we'll focus on decision-making under deep uncertainty, including enhancing our understanding of the capabilities and limitations associated with using climate science, diving into some planning frameworks that can support us in decision-making, and reviewing case studies related to adaptation leading practices. And then on day 3, we're going to continue highlighting some innovative case studies, get into some discussion on barriers, opportunities, and challenges related to successful adaptation, and also provide a forum for us to explore opportunities to enhance the co-creation of climate science in the Delaware River Basin. So that's what we have on deck for the next 3 days. And if we go to the next slide. We wanted to briefly review with you all some of the responses we received to the pre-workshop survey questions. Thank you to those of you who did fill out the survey. I think we had around 25 or so responses, and I'm just going to briefly go over some of the feedback that we received on these questions, starting with the question of, do you use climate projections or climate change assessment information in your work? And if you go to the next slide, Alyssa, we found that the majority of respondents said that they currently use information from climate models and/or climate assessments. And this is really speaking to why we have transitioned these WUCA convenings from being more of a training format to more of a workshop format, because we understand that a lot of practitioners are already working with climate change science. And so we want to recognize that and kind of take a deeper dive in some of the more complex topics that we're all facing on this issue. That being said, if you haven't worked with climate science before, we have plenty of resources that we can pass along as a part of this workshop. So definitely, feel free to reach out to any of us after any of the workshop days or in the future if you have follow-up questions. So next slide. Another pre-workshop survey question was, what challenges have you encountered in integrating climate information into your work? We received some great feedback here. Funding was a challenge many people identified. so funding for climate adaptation, evaluations, and investments. Others identified a lack of training or understanding to be a challenge. And I'll add to this, I saw one respondent said there is too much information and it's hard to navigate, which I think a lot of us as practitioners can relate to. There were also some respondents that said there's a lack of easily accessible and locally relevant climate projections, and the reality that other utility and organization priorities often take precedent over climate adaptation planning. Next slide. The third and final pre-workshop survey question I just want to review with you guys is, what skills or information would you like to get from the workshop? And we heard from folks that you'd like to gain a better understanding of how other utilities are incorporating climate projections into their planning. You'd like to understand the current precision in projections. You'd like to understand what others are doing, including sources of funding and other resources that utilities are accessing for this work. And you're hoping, as a potential outcome, some of you, to get more meaningful regional technical partnerships off the ground. So a lot of really great feedback from the pre-workshop survey. So thanks again for that. And if we go to the next slide, this is our last intro slide. I just want to briefly acknowledge all of the WUCA staff who have supported putting this workshop together, including Jen Gargliano with New York City DEP, Kelly Anderson with the Philadelphia Water Department, Allison Lau also with PWD, Brandon Goshi with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and Tirsu Asifo with Tampa Bay Water. And then a big, big thank you to all of our partners and trainers, Julie Vano, who you'll be hearing from right after this, I think, with the Aspen Global Change Institute, Steve Fries with US EPA, Alyssa Hall, who you just met at the Outstart from Cadmus, Rob Lempert from RAND, Jill Smith, and Heidi Roop with the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. So thank you to all of you. And with that, I think I will pass it off to Julie for our second presentation.